Oh, what do I say? Oh, the recording started. I didn't want to forget to start recording, so uh, the meeting is ready to go.
Recording in progress.
Well, thank you for joining us here for the Thursday, September 18th meeting of the Humboldt County Association of Governments Board. Can we get a roll call, please?
Chair Johnson,
Here.
Supervisor Madrone,
Present.
Mayor Sawatsky,
Here.
Mayor Burgell,
Here.
Councilmember Atkins Salazar, Councilmember Jorgensen,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Kenny,
Here.
Councilmember Orr, Pack Member Arroyo, Pack Member Allstrand.
Thank you. Our first item is to adjourn as the HCOG Board and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee. And after that, we will ask for public comment on non-agenda items. If anyone has a comment they'd like to make on a non-agenda item, this is the time to do it. I don't see any. So we will come to the consent calendar. We have the approval of the meeting record from August 18th. If anybody'd like to pull that, and do we have any public comment while we're? I see
I'd
no.
move approval of the consent agenda.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. We have no items removed from the consent calendar, so we come to our first action item on the SS TAC membership.
Yes, thank you, Chair Johnson. So our first order of business tonight is a little bit of housekeeping insofar as the makeup of our SS TAC, which is our Social Services and Transit Advisory Committee. So that, of course, is one of the advisory committees that HCOG hosts that works on primarily transit and social services related issues. So a few changes that we're trying to move through include the first one, which the city of Arcata has requested to be removed from the SS TAC membership. As of the first of the fiscal year, they have officially subbed out, so to speak, all of their transit services to HTA and are no longer doing it. And they were a discretionary member as a transit operator on the SS TAC. So they have requested to be removed from the SS TAC at this time. Of course, they're still represented as a member of the Technical Advisory Committee through their city engineer. And of course, they still have membership on the HCOG board, but they are seeking to not be a member of the SS TAC at this time. The other two membership changes that are being referenced in the staff report. So on the SS TAC, there are 9 statutory seats, so ones that by code have to exist, and then there's discretionary seats that HCOG can staff on a discretionary basis. CAE Transport has traditionally been a statutory member for a service provider that services seniors. They have traditionally done the dial-a-ride contract, the supplemental dial-a-ride contract that HTA has put on. Because that has gone back into HTA's operational realm, CAE no longer provides that service that makes them technically eligible for the statutory membership. The City of Fortuna continues to do so, and they are currently a discretionary member. They operate a 5310 transit program. So what we're proposing to do is essentially a little bit of bookkeeping and moving CAE Transport into the discretionary membership and move Fortuna Transit into the statutory membership. Again, it won't involve any changes to the membership between those two agencies, just the box that their membership falls into. So with that, we did take this to the SS TAC at their last meeting. I believe that was September 3rd, and they unanimously forwarded a recommendation that the HCOG board approve the membership changes. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Thank you. Do any board members have any questions regarding this change? As he said, it's a pretty much a housekeeping item, cleaning up some languages.
No questions here.
Any public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'd look for a motion.
Motion to approve the recommended changes.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Thank you. And our next item of business is the Trail Maintenance Ad Hoc Committee. Again, I believe Executive Director Byrd will be bringing this.
Yes, thank you again, Chair Johnson. So this is an item that there's been some discussions at the board level. I know I've had some discussions with some county supervisors and other local agency members in both law enforcement and public works and in the engineering side on the TAC. So now that a lot of these Class 1 commuter trails are starting to come online, and with the completion of the Bay Trail South, one of the big areas of focus that's really kind of in a lot of folks' minds is, it's great that these trails have been developed and they're getting used and it's really exciting. But now is kind of the thought of, well, how are we going to pay to keep these things nice and used and maintained and improved, both now and into the future, recognizing a lot of these trails, fortunately, have been delivered with grant dollars, and that we, through HCOG or through our local agencies have, unfortunately, somewhat of a dwindling funding source to take care of kind of our transportation systems as it is, and certainly our growing network of non-motorized transportation systems for which there's not really a dedicated funding stream either locally or at the state or federal level outside of the small apportionments we do through the TDA. So with that, there has been continued interest in really exploring trail maintenance funding, things like that. It's been talked about at the TAC several times, including earlier this year when the TAC kind of had a serious conversation about it. And after some thought, what we believe as HCOG staff would be the prudent thing to do at this time is to form a formal ad hoc committee with appropriate membership that could be formally designated as kind of a body of memberships that can really, sit down, schedule meetings, work with the Great Redwood Trail Agency, work with some of the, local and state elected officials to really figure out what some maintenance and some funding scenarios could be, hopefully make some recommendations for some future work or for some things to explore. So we did take that to the TAC at our last meeting. I believe that was the September 4th meeting, and they were all happy and wanted to see something like that move forward. The one item I will note, in addition to the original staff recommendation, which is that the ad hoc committee would explore funding and maintenance, it was a recommendation from several TAC members to add rules and regulation and just general trail safety as part of the scope of what would be explored. Something we have commonly fielded questions on, and again, especially now that last leg in the Bay Trail in its current alignment has been filled. There's concerns about just trail etiquette and speeds and the types of users and things like that. So I think the intent of this committee would be to explore, again, common rules and regulations for certain trails, and then also potentially go beyond that and just, again, think about some public safety type things, recognizing that the trail now crosses multiple jurisdictional boundaries. And so maybe putting some thought into what calls for service might look like, or if there was a need for any kind of, again, calls for service or enforcement or any of those types of things. So the recommendation at this time is that the HCOG board authorize the formation of an ad hoc committee to look into basically everything involving our local commuter trails, which could be funding and maintenance implications, calls for service safety, and rules and regulations. With that, I will also note that at the TAC meeting, we did ask for volunteers to participate, and I believe, and the staff report will note, we got volunteers from Riadel, Eureka Arcata, the county and Caltrans at this time, and it could be their TAC membership or it could be, other technical staff at those agencies as well. So with that, the staff recommendation is that the HCOG board authorize the formation of said ad hoc committee with the membership agencies as brought forward from the TAC recommendation. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Well, I do think we need, how would you put it, subject matter, technically literate people to work on this, especially, there is, like we said before, the public safety angle as well as trail maintenance angle and trail etiquette and safety there too. So, anybody have any questions? Yeah.
So would our action tonight include appointment of members from this board to the ad hoc? Or does that come in a different way? Are we part of the ad hoc?
Yeah, turn your mic on.
Are we part of the ad hoc or not? Or is that included in tonight's action to figure out who would be part of that ad hoc? And does anybody from this board end up on the ad hoc?
I think that the ad hoc committee could include representation all over the place. Right now, the recommendation is for the members of, I guess, the TAC folks that would be on there. But I think there is the opportunity to consider more members as well. The one thing I will note on top of it is the city of Rio Dell did volunteer themselves to participate in the ad hoc committee. It's unclear whether they will at this time because, unfortunately, from the tax side, they are represented by a consultant. So, of course, participation in things, comes with an extra cost in order to do those things. So, Rio Dell has not indicated if they'll consistently be able to staff that position. But I am unsure at this time how many members we're limited to, because typically there's limits on how many people can form an ad hoc committee. So that's something I would have to come back with some clarification on.
So you're saying that basically the existing TAC, possibly more in the future, would just take on this additional ad hoc duties?
Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And
if it's ongoing, then it becomes a standing committee rather than ad hoc. But for now, for a year or so, we'd be looking at an ad hoc. I think it's great. I mean, it's long overdue. We've been talking about it a lot at the county, of course, because we're taking on a lot of liability. And, back when we were building the Hammond Trail, and then we were like, okay, now what's next? And the county was like, oh, nothing, because we don't have the O&M to really manage or help with all. Thank goodness for Bay Trail Advocates. They've created a trail fund that provides some interest bearing account income to help with stuff. And then the Humboldt Trails Council, and all the volunteer work they do on all of our trails with trail stewards and all that kind of stuff. So that's great. I talked briefly with Tom Mattson about maybe in a year or two out, not right now by any means, maybe another measure on the ballot. Maybe it's a property tax assessment rather than a sales tax, because we're so high already on sales. It's crazy. But maybe a property tax assessment for open space, parks, trails. There are a lot of really great examples all over Northern California, and particularly the Bay Area, of very successful campaigns to be able to get those kinds of funds in place. And there's great examples of failed campaigns. So I'm assuming the TAC will avail themselves of all that great information that's out there and stuff. So, okay.
Any other questions, comments?
We do comments after public comment.
I will.
I'll comment after public comment.
Okay.
Are
is
there any? Sorry. Are there any projected costs that you can foresee right now for like a yearly maintenance on the trail as it currently stands?
There's probably some information like that in some of the project reports that have been put forward that would be part of the delivery process of any of those trail segments, thinking about, what O&M is. But big picture, there's a lot of small duties that would be completed that can kind of fit into the, operation and maintenance realm of local agencies while a trail's new, which could be minor graffiti removal or a little trash pickup or freshening some striping, things like that. I think one of the big things that we're trying to get ahead of is as pavement starts to deteriorate or crack, sometimes you'll get little slips or slides. A lot of the bay trails right on the bay where there could be some wave run-up issues or things like that. It's really thinking about those bigger repairs that could be unforeseen, that could be a 10, 30, 50, $100,000 repair, things that are, outside of the ability for local agencies to pay for, at least with what they currently have, planned in their budget. So it's a little bit of a moving target, but as you think about the life cycle of the infrastructure, it's reasonable to assume in 50-ish years, the entire trail would need to be repaved, which is a significant expense. So
Is there any initial agreement to fix any issues that pop up in the first couple years, or is it as is?
my understanding, and these are some conversations that I explored in my time in Fortuna, because we started to work on thinking about Great Redwood Trail work down there as well. I think some of those conversations have started to happen, but outside of that, I think most agencies have been responding to minor maintenance needs that have fallen within their jurisdiction, but it hasn't gone beyond that, and that's where I think part of the effort here is to bring it beyond that and to recognize that it's now somewhat of a regional issue, because we have, similar to the state highway system or with county roads, we have roads that are crossing or trails that are crossing jurisdictional boundaries. So
Great, thank you.
Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, do you have any other?
I do.
Yes.
So, I'll turn my mic on. So, I think this is a great idea. We see it all the time just here in Eureka on our trails, just finding the maintenance and the people to do that and volunteer. And, we live in a community that really does support each other. And so it's great to have the trail stewards and all the people out there. But I also think it's important that we continue to look for funding and to create ways that we can continue that maintenance. I also am very excited to discuss rules of the road and safety on the trails. I've been out a lot and seen people on their motorized vehicles, or not motorized, but, electric bikes, and speeding down the trail. And then you've got little kids coming into where they're at, and just the safety sometimes can be really scary. And I think, there are a lot of people, it's wonderful to see so many people out, but they're not necessarily a lot of people that still understand things like on your left, or, this is common courtesy. We move over, those kinds of things. So I'm excited to hear more about how we can get that, and also to have that be uniform, because we want to make sure that the full trail, that we're not, changing up, every 5 miles or 3 miles or what have you. I think the consistency will be a really important piece of that. So I support this, and I think that if we end up having someone from our board join the ad hoc committee, I think that I would nominate Supervisor Madrone, as he's been working diligently on these trail system for a very long time, if we come to that point, which we're not, I guess, right now. But I just wanted to throw that out there. So with that, I'd like to make the motion. The PAC recommends that the HCOG board is this the motion? Where's the motion? Maybe it is. The PAC recommends that the HCOG board consider approving. No, that's not the motion. Do you have a motion? Oh, that is what I read. Okay.
Yep.
So I move that the PAC recommends that the HCOG board consider approving the formation of an ad hoc committee to explore possible maintenance and safety funding strategies and explore rules and regulations for local non-motorized trails.
I'll second that motion. And I'd just like to also point out, I'm sure you probably know this, Brendan, but the master plan for the Great Redwood Trail is 600 pages thick and has massive sections around uniform signing, uniform rules, all those kinds of things, because the Great Redwood Trail is going through multiple jurisdictions. And so we wanted to make sure there was consistency with signage and rules, whether we're on the City of Eureka's section or Arcata's section or Ukiah's section or whatever it might be. So that'll probably be a great manual for this ad hoc. And it's going to be done sometime in the next several months. So.
That's great.
All right. Well, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye. That was a late aye.
Motion approved unanimously. So at this point, we will, by motion, reconvene as the HCOG board and approve the PAC recommendations. So entertain a motion to reconvene as the HCOG board.
I will so move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. All right. We come now to our board action item and the Cycle 7 Regional Housing Needs Allocation Methodology.
Excellent, thank you. And I would just like to note, the board this evening looks just like the pack. I can't believe it. That was a bad joke, I guess. So, going into this next item, which of course is the bigger one in the evening and is kind of one of the larger steps we've taken so far in the greater regional housing needs allocation process. And that is the hope that this evening the board identifies what, at least for now, is a preferred allocation alternative for allocating Humboldt's RENA Cycle 7 allocation that we received from Housing and Community Development. So before we dive in, I just want to start again with just a brief bit of background for anybody here or participating virtually that's not familiar with the discussions we've been having at previous board meetings. What is RENA? Of course, it's one of the many acronyms that we throw around all the time in our professional lives. But RENA, RHNA, stands for the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. So that's some legislation that was enacted in 1980 to ensure that local jurisdictions and COGs were planning for their share of the state's housing need across all income levels. So it's somewhat interesting. HCOG is the region's transportation planning agency, and it's often surprising to some to learn that we also go into housing at HCOG too. And the reason being is because in California code, in government code, the COGs, the Council of Governments, are responsible for developing a methodology and allocating units, RENA units, to the individual agencies that are part of the COG. So that is why we are handling the regional housing needs determination and why we are talking about the methodology here this evening. And then lastly, again, and I think these are some key points because there is always a little bit of question or confusion in and around what is or isn't RENA. And again, some things that we have talked about in recent meetings that I'd like to reiterate. RENA is a planning requirement. So these are regional housing units that need to be planned within our region over the next 8 years as part of RENA Cycle 7. This is not an expectation that these units are necessarily constructed or caused to be constructed by local agencies. It's about planning and preparing and zoning for those units. And then lastly, the RENA process and the allocation methodology process that we're undertaking right now is not specifically picking sites and developable sites. That's a housing element exercise that happens after local agencies are assigned their RENA unit allocations. So this will be a familiar table that we've seen a few times at recent board meetings. This is the regional housing needs determination that we received from Housing and Community Development on July 15th, 2025. In the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the major number that we focus on and that folks care about the most, which is our total regional housing needs allocation. That's 5,962 total units. You'll see in this table that number is developed by looking at Department of Finance housing projections, by a litany of adjustments, housing adjustments that HCD applies to either, well, never to decrease, but to increase your RENA allocation for population growth. The board did get a presentation, of course, from HCD staff at the August meeting that went into those in detail. But just to kind of paint a different picture of what that allocation looks like, you'll see on this pie chart here, this is the total regional allocation, the approximately 6,000 units that's broken down. You can think of it as, I guess, the bucket or the cause that that is creating those housing unit allocations. So you'll see in the top in the light green, that's population growth. So Department of Finance is projecting that we're going to continue to lose county population for a teeny bit before starting to rebound, and that by the end of our planning cycle in 2035, that the county will be about 400 or 500 more in population. With that, our RENA, our determination, is only projecting a need for 265 more housing units as a result of population. There's just shy of 800 units projected to address the homelessness issues in the county, 58 for demolition replacements, and then the remaining about 5,000 units is driven by market factors and low housing availability within the region, which has caused our region to have low vacancy rates, so low vacancy for both renter-occupied or owner-occupied housing units. i.e. there's not much housing stock to choose from at any given time for housing mobility or housing in general. Overcrowding, so this is a measurement of more people than ideal living within one housing unit. And then cost burden being the big green one on the bottom. So cost burden, again, is a measurement of households that are spending more than 30% of their gross annual income on housing. So crowding, vacancy, and cost burden are all measurements of market pressure, right? There's not enough, there's projected to be not enough housing in the market to drive costs down and to have vacancy rates be suitable for housing opportunity and housing mobility. So what you can really think about our determination as being in two pots. About 17% of the units, or just over 1,000, are to address population growth and existing unhoused populations. And about 5,000 of the units projected for our region are to deal with what's ultimately deemed an unhealthy housing market condition, right? We don't have enough housing stock to keep things available and to have costs be driven down to a point where they are affordable and attainable for the folks that are living and working within our region. Having some technical difficulty. Can you click me forward, or are we frozen? Excellent, thank you. So moving on to the next part of our determination, of course, we get kind of the big picture, which is the total number of units broken down by where those units are calculated from. The other thing that is provided to ACOG and to HCOG specifically are those units broken down into requirements for units fitting each of the 6 state-mandated income categories. So traditionally, there's been 4 between very low up to above moderate. RHNA Cycle 7 breaks very low now into 3 total categories. So now we have unit requirements in categories from everywhere from acutely low to above moderate. So as you can see, of the 5,962 units we've been allocated, of that, 38.2% of those units need to fall into housing affordability for above moderate, 9.5% for moderate, so on and so forth. The affordability is based on our local regional housing medium family income, which in Humboldt County, the medium family income, or MFI, is $88,300. So when we do the allocation, we not only have to make sure that the total number of units are allocated, but the total number of units within each income category is allocated and balanced across all of the agencies at the end of that. Lastly, before we jump into the methodology here, just for a little bit of background, this is just a quick table that is a comparison of our previous RHNA cycles going all the way back to Cycle 2 in 1990 up to Cycle 7, which will start in 2027. So just for some context, and what you can see is, for all intents and purposes, it's the biggest RHNA cycle allocation that Humboldt has received. It's the largest one since Cycle 2, which was the early 90s, of course, when timber and other industries were still in full swing and in a little bit of a boom mode themselves. So it's a very large allocation, almost double the allocation that was received in Cycle 6 in 2018. On the right-hand side, you'll see a reference, it's annualized RHNA. So again, if you want to think about the number of units per year that would be developed in that RHNA scenario, and again, RHNA is not a requirement to build, it's a requirement to zone. But over 8 years, that would be an average development of 745 units per year across the region in order to meet that annualized RHNA target in Cycle 7. So before we jump into the allocation methodology, I just thought I'd take a brief pause and see if any members of the board had any questions.
Does any board members have questions?
I think you stated already, but was the MFI based on California income or with Humboldt County income?
I believe the MFI is for Humboldt County, the medium family income, and they calculate that regionally. Mm-hmm. And
the other question, have we already seen a reduction in have we already seen an increase in available housing due to the marijuana industry being previously grown inside houses?
Yeah, I haven't studied the numbers in detail, but what I have seen in year-over-year population trends is a lot of our agencies have remained flat like Fortuna. I believe Eureka, and we do have Kristen with the city of Eureka here this evening. She could probably speak to this better than me, but I think Eureka may have even lost a little bit of population. I believe Arcata is the only local jurisdiction in recent years that has still grown, even then just by a little bit. And my understanding is the county has decreased several thousand. And although, the numbers as they come from the census and from Department of Finance don't pinpoint necessarily where those are, I think, a reasonable assumption is that could be associated with, people living rurally where you see a lot more home listings, things like that.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
I was just curious. Does gentrification play any part in this, as far as unhealthy housing market? I mean, when we look at Eureka, we have people moving up, buying properties from out of the area. Prices are going up. Is that a consideration when we're discussing this at all?
No, only because what they're looking at is it plays a role in it, because when that happens and when folks with more resource from out of the area come in, it drives the housing market up. So as you start to think about cost burden, that's part of the reason. That's one of the many factors as to why we are locally cost burdened, is because with folks moving here and selling more expensive homes in other areas, it makes the local housing market less affordable and makes people around here have to have more of that. So that does absolutely play into the allocation adjustment that comes in the cost burden and overcrowding. Because if that wasn't happening and houses were more affordable, if there were 20% less across the board, then our overcrowding percentage would be closer to that national average, and we would have received less units because of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciated the HCD presentation, and in particular, when the question was asked, and you had it in your first slide, what RENA is not is a requirement, to build this. And because, these numbers are out of control, frankly, from the reality of what's really going to happen. We're looking at getting a town center ordinance approved, hopefully in the near future, for McKinleyville. And the build out on that is possibly, another 2,400 units, 6,000 people. But that's 20 years out, right? That's 6,000 people, and it's only 2,400 units, over a 20-year period, right? And McKinleyville, there's less and less space to build anymore. It's been the place that's allowed the county in particular to, work towards meeting its numbers. But these numbers are way out of control. I think most people realize that. So I was really pleased to hear that there's no penalty if you don't meet them. It's just do your best. And I think for them, do your best is that you've contacted them to ask for resources and assistance, and that we're all staying up as communities on, updating our housing plans and all that kind of stuff. So that was good news to me, because it takes away a little bit of the burden to think, let's just do our best. Let's figure out where and how. And as much as I want to see more solar, I do appreciate the state. I don't know if the governor signed it or not, but there was a new law to say, the solar and sprinkler requirements are going to be waived for the time being. And again, it's something we probably need to do, but if people want to put on sprinklers, they can do it. I'm sorry. It just, to me, that was another huge burden. And you hear that a lot from contractors, that just is one more thing after another, and then the hookup fees and on and on and on. It's made it to where it's hard to build housing. So I can appreciate that, we're going to do our best, and you guys are focused on that. So anyway, thank you.
One more thing.
Yes.
When you're done. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask for more, if there's any more comments from the board.
Well,
Questions.
I'm curious because, I did hear that, no penalties. However, I'm curious about that in the degree that we do have to show that those units can be, we don't have to build them. This is my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong. We don't have to build them, but we do have to show that we can build them. And if we cannot show that, can that be a penalty as far as grant funding and those types of things? So that could be a problem looking down the road.
Yeah, and again, that starts to get a little bit more into the element, or the territory of housing elements.
Okay.
So these allocations go out with that. Local agencies take these numbers and transform them hopefully into a certified housing element. And that's where more the measurement of compliance comes in, being current and complying with the policies, be they state mandated policies or locally elected policies that are included in your housing element. That's something that's been challenging for, and as you've seen, some of the local agencies have had difficulty doing all of those policies all the time. And then outside of that, figuring out where to, allocate those units and how to substantiate that with HCD, that's kind of a whole nother thing that, quite frankly, it doesn't seem like always really well coalesces with RENA. RENA seems to be very somewhat conservative and big thinking in its intent, and the housing elements are much more based in reality. And again, I know one of our audience members here, Miss Kenyon with Eureka, could speak to much more detail on that. But
I was just curious because when they give us these impossible numbers, it seems that creates, it may not be a penalty, but it certainly creates problems for our cities in trying to get the dollars that we need to implement the project.
Yeah. It does very much. And one thing I will note is it is a routine discussion that we have with kind of what I'll call like our RENA working group, which we'll talk about more here in a moment, is the disconnect at times between the RENA process through HCD and the housing element process through HCD. And something that we have talked about and will continue to do is, try to start advocating for some more understanding between these two processes, because they're compartmentalized in HCD. You can ask a housing element question to RENA staff and they won't know the answer. And we experienced a little bit of that last time with the presentation that we received. We got a lot of good information, but they're not the folks that are working in housing elements and answering those questions. So trying to raise some local awareness to some of the challenges, because a lot of our local agency staff are feeling some stresses about the housing element cycle this time around with the number of units, and rightfully so. So
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. ADUs, do they count as housing units?
They count as housing units. And again, this is a little bit more of a housing element area. The number that you can justify as part of a housing element is a little bit of a sticky area. So in theory, tons and tons and tons and tons of parcels can have an ADU on it, but it's not as simple as just saying, well, we have 4,000 parcels in town, each of which could get an ADU. Then we're good, right?
Right. Yeah, you'd think
It's
logic would
It's not so
prevail.
simple. Housing elements, from my understanding, are based a little bit more on also looking at the reality of those types of developments and market trends, and is the demand there. So
Yeah.
that process blends in a lot more market realism to it.
Okay. Yeah, because with the state's new passage of the law that makes all that ministerial now, secondary units, that was certainly the purpose of that, was to incentivize the development of more, secondary dwelling units and stuff. So, okay, thank you.
Wow. We'd like to
One more thing.
open it up to.
I just have one more. I'm just curious, because we do have Kristen here, if maybe she could speak to the ADU portion, because is it percentage per city, or are there certain numbers per city that they can only do a certain number, even if you have 100?
Yeah. So, sorry, Kristen Kenyon. I'm the Development Services Director for Eureka. When you're doing your site inventory and your housing element to demonstrate you have enough adequate space for your arena, when you have vacant sites, all it is like, oh, it's zoned right, and it's not overly constrained by wetlands and stuff. Like there's a buildable spot, it's zoned correctly, and you haven't counted it in too many previous cycles. When you have a non-vacant site, like in the built-out cities, we have to point to non-vacant sites. The bar is higher. You have to show that there's like a demonstrated real it's going to happen. It's going to get built in this next housing cycle. So more cities that have greater market demand, they can show that people are desperate to buy their vacant mall to build housing, and they can demonstrate that it's going to happen in the housing cycle, and then they can count a ton of units on that mall. But if you don't have the demand, it's really hard to demonstrate that these sites are going to get an ADU or are going to get redeveloped, like we have zoning that can accommodate a huge RENA. We allow 10-story buildings in our downtown, but HCD doesn't take that as evidence that our 2-story buildings are going to get redeveloped. We have to give them more evidence that that will happen during this. We have to show them, oh yeah, we got this 10-story building over here, and I have all these other developers on the line interested. And so for us, we said, hey, we have thousands of parcels that could accommodate ADUs. And they're like, well, how many ADUs have you been building per year? And prior to 2019, we'd been building like 5 ADUs a year in the city. So they said, okay, with like all these implementation measures, you're going to put ADU plans online. You're going to you're going to approve them in 45 days or less. You're not going to have any, you're going to do all these things. We'll let you count 20 ADUs a year. So with a bunch of implementation measures, we only were allowed to count 20 per year. So in a built out city like Eureka, when we don't have the vacant sites, it gets really hard to find places to prove to HCD that there's adequate demonstrated RENA space, if that makes sense.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Well, actually, I was going to open it up for public comment if you have any other. Any public comment out there? No?
Okay.
Well, thank you for your discussion, though, on ADUs and other matters there. No other? Okay.
Excellent. Yeah.
I was just getting to that point where we got so far.
There we go. Well, it's been a great discussion. I'm glad everybody's also thinking about it in terms of next steps, because of course that's where the agencies are and agency staff is. So making sure that we're all kind of in that same frame of mind, I think is great. But with that, we will jump into the next portion of the presentation, which is the allocation methodology itself. Thank you, Stevie. So as discussed at some previous board presentations, HCOG is required to develop the allocation methodology for the regional housing needs determination, and that methodology must satisfy the 5 statutory RENA objectives, which I'll go over here again in just a minute, and it must consider all the factors listed in California Code Section 6558404D, which is also the subject of the survey which HCOG has to furnish to local agencies. So this is a summarized list of the RENA objectives, again, of which there are 5. They're much more verbose in code, but this gets the point across. The RENA objectives need to increase housing supply and mix in all areas equitably, needs to promote infill development and work towards regional greenhouse gas reduction targets. It needs to improve interregional jobs and housing. It needs to improve housing type, cost, and diversity in all jurisdictions, and it needs to further the state's fair housing goals. And I will note that that last RENA objective is new to Cycle 7. Before, it was only 4 RENA objectives. As far as the methodology factors, this is that 65584D that was on the slide before. There are 13 areas that are supposed to be considered in an allocation methodology, not necessarily part of the mathematics of it, if you will, but should be taken into account when allocating units. It's anything from considering the jobs housing relationship, rates of overcrowding in a jurisdiction, housing needs of farm workers or students as population of the California State University system, so on and so forth. So with that, one item that I lost my clicker again. Maybe try just clicking on the slideshow. There we go. With that, on July 10th, HCOG sent out a survey with all 13 items to the local agencies to get responses specific to those 13 methodology factors that are supposed to be considered. We only received 3 responses, which is not abnormal compared to last RENA cycles. We got those from Trinidad, from Arcata, and Ferndale. We had some interesting items to discuss with that, which I'll note below. But before getting into that, I would like to note, and we'll talk about it more here in a second, convened through HCOG has been the RENA working group, if you will, which is kind of the senior planner, director level positions from all the community development departments across the county. So we are working on these items, including methodology, survey factors, all these things regionally several times a year. So even agencies that did not provide a formal response. Their interests, their constraints, their items as it pertains to these are part of our calculus. They're part of the working group that is ultimately bringing forward this recommended methodology. So I just do want to note that. But with that, some interesting things just to note to the board that we did get from the surveys. From Trinidad, of course, as might be expected, they're probably one of the local agencies that has more utility constraints than most, just because they don't have a consolidated wastewater treatment plant. They're on on-site wastewater treatment systems, so there's limits to how densely they can develop within that area. The city of Arcata, of course, has high housing demand and pretty aggressive aspirations for growth of Cal Poly Humboldt. And then Ferndale, is among some of our other agencies, has more demand for farm worker and ranch housing and housing units, given its proximity to a lot of the ranching activities in the Eel River Valley. And ultimately, they would like to provide more housing for families and attract more businesses as well. So going into that, we did start convening our regional RENA working group in May of this year to specifically work on the RENA Cycle 7 allocation. So the work that group has done has been everything from reviewing the regional housing needs determination and providing some comments and kind of working together. We've looked at allocation methodology. We've discussed additional factors that could be considered in an allocation methodology. We've looked at everything from the RENA objectives, and really, again, I want to express that what is being brought forward in the recommendation for the RENA allocation methodology is a group effort, and not just something coming from HCOG. The voices of the agencies are clearly represented in what's being brought forward. So with that, past RENA cycles through HCOG have focused on allocating units to agencies based on the regional distribution of jobs and the regional distribution of population. Given that there continues to be some amendments to the RENA objectives with things like the fair housing or the greenhouse gas reduction targets, something we did look at early on in the allocation process this year was discussing if more information should be folded into that methodology. Should we directly measure VMT as part of it? Should we consider something like opportunity score, which is one of the state's newer metrics for measuring fair housing goals, which again is that new RENA Objective 5, which essentially is a measure of housing opportunity as defined by access to good schools, access to public spaces, census blocks with higher median household incomes and higher levels of education. Again, with the goal behind it to diversify housing opportunity for all income levels in what are considered high opportunity or desirable areas to live. And then lastly, things as basic as land suitability, land constraints, vacant sites, and things like that. But in working through a few meetings and discussing amongst all of the community development staff, what is being brought forward for consideration this evening is again a methodology that would allocate units based on percentage of regional jobs and percentage of regional population. And we'll get more into that here in the next few slides. And I want to start with jobs and why we use jobs as a method to allocate units to each individual agency. So we use jobs because we feel like it, of course, if you are locating units in the job centers, you're helping to promote the jobs housing balance. The existing job centers are the developed areas already, so you're leveraging existing infrastructure investments. Think your water systems, your sewer systems, your roads, your storm drains. You're not trying to necessarily expand outward. You're trying to think about building within a jurisdiction's existing boundaries to the extent you can. And then lastly, job centers are typically areas with lower VMT, vehicle miles traveled, which is kind of that new target everybody's trying to hit, where we're driving less in personalized vehicle transportation. So with that, in this graph on the right hand side, you'll see what this is a bar chart that is each jurisdiction, and you'll see the jurisdictions labeled on the bottom. It's their percentage of the region's jobs. So Eureka has almost 40% of all of the jobs located in Humboldt County. The county areas a little over 30%, Arcata a little over 20%, so on and so forth. What you'll see in the orange curve with the dots that accompanies it, that is the per capita VMT for each one of those regions. in the red horizontal line, you'll see the regional average VMT for the whole county. So per capita, the county averages 22.1 miles per day per person for all of their trips, be it jobs or school or otherwise. And you'll see that the job centers, Eureka, the county areas, Arcata and Fortuna, all generate vehicle miles traveled numbers that are below the county average. So of course, that's one of the goals with infill, is to locate housing in areas where there's job centers. People don't have to drive as much. The services are there. So of course, by locating and using jobs as a proxy for that, we're also achieving those VMT goals, because as you can see, those are all the areas with lower VMTs. Moving over to population, we feel that this is a really important one to include, because as we'll get into a little bit more here on the next slide, one thing that is clear from our regional housing needs determination is that overcrowding, cost burden, and vacancy rate issues are a huge driver in the number of units that are being allocated to our area. And as you'll see here in a moment, it is an issue that is common to all of our jurisdictions. So in allocating based on population, we're able to more uniformly address some of those big picture issues across all areas of the county, not just in our job centers. The last thing it allows us the opportunity to do is to promote housing diversity and opportunity in all of our areas as well. So of course, focusing on infill and in job centers is great, but one of the other major things we're asked to do with RENA is to provide housing opportunity and to locate housing in higher opportunity areas, which aren't always the job centers. So using population will help balance and provide that additional level of opportunity. So there's a lot going on here, and there's other things that'll pop up, and with that, I'm sorry. But this bar graph right here is showing by agencies, each agency's relative cost burden. So regionally, if you average, I believe the region's housing market is about 44% cost burden. If you break it down to each agency, you'll see Arcata's 50%, Blue Lake is just under 40%, so on and so forth. The red horizontal line you'll see is the national average. That's what our region is measured by as far as the benchmark, or what is considered a healthy percentage of cost burden. So again, every one of our agencies deals with this, some a little bit more than others, but it's still a uniform problem, especially with our larger agencies. We have some additional issues that we face too, and this, I apologize if it's a little difficult to see because it's at the bottom, but as we think about housing opportunity in areas that have high opportunity score, we have some places like Blue Lake which have a slightly lower rate of cost burden, but they have a higher opportunity score, which means they have, kind of a better place, a place you would want to promote more housing opportunities because it's a desirable place to live. So that's where trying to balance the impact of all these areas gets a little tough, because even if one area has slightly less cost burden, as you can see in the case of Blue Lake or Fortuna, it has lower vacancy rates, which means that their housing units are in a little bit higher demand and they're harder to get, and therefore providing that opportunity in those areas, even if they're not necessarily the job centers, is important. Not necessarily focusing on delivering, massive amounts of units in those areas, but achieving the goals of RENA by providing housing opportunity. So that blends into our next two slides, which are the alternatives that have been developed and included in the staff report. The first one here, alternative 1, would weight jobs and population at 50%. Another way to think about that would be to say, take 3,000 units, which is half of the 6,000 assigned, and distribute them based on the region's jobs. Take the other half of those units and distribute them based on the population. And when you do that, you'll see the column on the right where Arcata gets about 1,000 units, Blue Lake about 40, Eureka a little over 1,700, so on and so forth. Alternative 2, which we looked at the group level, would increase the jobs weighting to 60%, reduce the population rating to 40%. One thing I will note with the weighting and the changes is it doesn't really result in a big change, although there is some diversity in our typically our job centers are our higher population areas too. So changing the weighting is not like a really big astronomical change in the ultimate number provided or allocated, I should say. And as a case in point, Arcata even when you change the weighting 10%, gets 39 more units. Fortuna only gets 10 fewer units. So it's not a huge change in either alternative. I will note, in the past, we've looked at a third alternative, which is jobs at 40%, population at 60. We kind of threw that one out early on in the process, just recognizing that weighting jobs at least at 50%, was the priority initially within the working group. Fast forward, HCOG and the working group's recommendation would be that the HCOG board identify alternative one as the preferred allocation methodology in order to allocate that initial number of units to all the agencies. And alternative one would be the 50% for both jobs and population. And again, why that's believed by the group and by HCOG at this point to be the best alternative is because it balances the desire for regional infill and climate goals and VMT targets while also trying to balance the fact that we have overcrowding and vacancy rate issues and opportunity needs and housing diversity needs in all areas of the county as well. So I wanted to provide a few extra slides here that really kind of show if alternative one is selected, how does that kind of meet some of these other criteria more specifically? So what you see here on this slide is the number of units under alternative one that would be applied to each agency. So the county would get about 2,500, Eureka about 1,700, and it goes down the line from there. If you look at the 4 major urbanized jurisdictions, and again, when I say urbanized, recognizing the county is a big area and it has urban areas and rural areas, but if you look at the major areas where housing development would be occurring, if we do alternative one, which is 50% jobs, 50% housing, it would be reasonable to expect with the county developing in the urban areas that 96% of those allocated units would end up in the area where 97% of our regional jobs are. So what that means is even weighting 50% at population, it's pretty reasonable to say most of those housing units are still going to end up in the urban centers, in the job centers. Moving on to VMT, if you look at our 4 major areas, the county, Eureka, Arcata, and Fortuna, if this moves forward, 96% of the allocated housing units could be located in areas that currently have VMT rates that are between 12 and 38% below the county's average. And that would include areas of the county considering from Lolita all the way up to McKinleyville. So I will note that VMT calculation doesn't take into account, if the county were to develop a big housing project in Wichipec, which, again, I don't think is the intent of anybody at this point. But in those areas of McKinleyville, in those areas in South Eureka, those really key neighboring communities to the other jurisdictions, they have great infill opportunities in there. And as Supervisor Madrone noted, with projects like the McKinleyville Town Center that could provide a lot of housing, those are also areas with low VMT that are within the county. If you look even more in the Humboldt Bay area, which of course is the bigger economic engine area, and look at just the county areas of Humboldt Bay with Eureka and Arcata, again, just thinking about VMT, that could be 88% of the units located in areas with 20 to 38% reductions in VMT, or areas that produce 20 to 38% less VMT than other areas of the county. So big picture, even though we're including population as a weighting measure and not just jobs, the expectation is that through appropriate measures in housing elements and housing placement, still most of all these units are going in places that are infill, that produce lower levels of VMT, that maximize existing infrastructure, which of course everybody wants to do. Instead of increasing liability, we want to consolidate liability for infrastructure. This is a little bit of an interesting one. I did request some last minute information from our local agencies to help with the slide, so I do appreciate everybody that helped out. If you think again about annualized RHNA, so again, if we take those 6,000 units and spread them over 8 years, it's about 750 units per year. And this is what that would look like spread across each agency. So the county at about 300, Eureka a little over 200. What you see in the orange next to it are the number of housing units that were developed last year. So that's kind of a comparison of what we're planning and getting through this allocation versus what was built last year. So as you see, the the demand, even with some of the subsidized housing projects, the number of units being delivered was less than 200 in calendar year 2024, but we'll be looking at annualized allocations through planning at more like 750. So there is a big disconnect between what's being developed and what's being required for planning. You know, the development numbers change. If two big multifamily projects come online in a year for an agency, it's going to result in a very large number of housing units, but that might be followed by a number of years where that doesn't happen. So this is just data from 2024. Next is the second piece of the allocation methodology, and I'll be brief, but it is important to kind of explain it because this is the one that's a little bit more difficult to wrap your head around sometimes, at least it was for me. So once we calculate the number of units that would go to each agency, we then have to distribute those in each agency for all 6 income categories. So what the goal is through RENA is to start by allocating the region average for each agency in that income category. So regardless of what that agency's existing housing stock is, what we want to do is drive it to the regional average. But what we do as a means to help push an agency's housing stock towards the regional average is apply an adjustment factor. So as a level of example, if the regional average for moderate housing is 10% and an agency currently has 20%, what they would be allocated is 8% under this allocation method, which is to say, hey, we're going to give you the regional average and we're going to adjust it further based on the gap, the difference between where you are and where we think you need to be. And so what is of note in this particular thing, and it'll follow up with the table that breaks down the agency allocations per allocation or per income category, is that in the past, HCOG has applied a 10% adjustment. So kind of a little incremental adjustment to that percentage, again, to try to balance an agency's housing stock. What we're proposing as part of Cycle 7 here is to double that adjustment to 20%. So it still is not going to result in any huge swings in the housing stock within an agency, but it is going to further push those unit allocations to be more diversified for each agency. So the recommendation is to double that correction factor, which results in this table here. So this is each agency's individual allocation per income category, which totals at the end there on the right-hand side into the number of units that would result from the 50-50 split between jobs and population. So again, Arcade, I'll pick on them because they're on top in the alphabetical table, would be 90 units in the acutely low income category, 135 in the extremely low, 103 in very low, 201 in low, 100 in moderate, and 413 units in above moderate. So that is the methodology. I want to touch briefly on the timeline and where we are and the significance of the board's deliberation and decision here tonight versus the bigger picture with RENA. So of course, we've been talking about this for a few months, and on July 10th, we issued the survey to local agencies. On July 15th, we received our final regional housing needs determination from HCD. The last few board meetings, we've had some presentations and some updates on the process. We've been meeting as a working group, and this is, again, the decision-making time that we're asking the board to identify a preferred alternative for the RENA methodology. What that would kickstart is our 60-day public agency and public review comment period on the methodology. So per code requirement, once we identify the preferred alternative, we'll post it on our website. We'll put transmittals to be sent directly to our local agencies. Although they've already been a part of this process, that'll be the formal notification that the board has taken action and identified an alternative. We will hold a public hearing about the methodology selected in October at the board's October meeting. We will continue to do some pre-consultation with HCD to make sure that they're on board with what is being proposed at this time as well. And then at the conclusion of the public review period, once the agencies have been able to formally review them at their council level or at their board level, and after we get through the public hearing in December, that'll be after the 60-day period has elapsed, and at our December HCOG board meeting, we'll be looking to have a final adoption, if you will, or I guess it's more of an approval of the allocation methodology. At that point in time, we would be able to formally submit that methodology to HCD. But again, we'd be looking to be working closely with HCD leading up to that time to make sure that we had a methodology that was going to pass their tests for this cycle. Lastly, before we close out and send it back to the board, I do want to note, and I'm sure the board saw that we did receive some written comments on the allocation methodology earlier this week. And I wanted to speak to some of those, given that we had enough time to think about the comments that were received and foster any conversation should the board have any questions in regards to them. So we did receive a letter from some local community-based organizations that took exception to the use of population as an allocation methodology, arguing that if cost burden, vacancy, and overcrowding are issues of importance, that they should be measured more directly in the method and not by proxy through population. I did cover with some of the charts and graphs earlier the working group and why we feel that population is a good use of that tool in order to address those issues, because they are universal and there's a give and take across all of our agencies in the county. Again, some have slightly higher cost burden rates, some have slightly higher opportunity rates, some have slightly lower vacancy rates. Going in with population is a good, robust metric that's based on really robust data, of course, census data, where some of the other data like vacancy rates and cost burden, that it can be solid data too, but those tend to fluctuate year over year or month over month a little bit more than population. So while we could explore doing an allocation method that really explored a bunch of little details more individually, the working group's feeling is that might be follow the law of diminishing returns, where we can heavily complicate a process, but it might not ultimately result in something that is notably different. And it might be using data that isn't quite as robust as something like plain population data. Next was the consideration that our methodology didn't explicitly address water, sewer, or utility constraints. So with that, I will note that although that's not part of our allocation methodology, and nor would it make sense to be, because we wouldn't be sitting back thinking, well, we should put units where there's water and sewer capacity, because that's not necessarily, again, where the jobs are, where the services are, where the other opportunities are. The one thing that we do is our local agency planning staff are working with their technical staff, with their public works department as part of their planning efforts to ensure that there is capacity with their utility systems to provide these as part of their planning process. To take it a step further and to allow me to go back to my old days as an engineer, I have also done outreach to all of the technical staff at agencies, just to, again, kind of foster some discussion and just understand their utility systems a little better and how that interfaces with RENA and all these allocations. And one thing I will say is, outside of Trinidad, which has a few unique constraints, given that they are on-site wastewater and their water system is not from Humboldt Bay, all of our other agencies have indicated that they have utility capacity in order to handle the RENA allocations that's coming forward. So again, it's not an explicit part of the RENA allocation methodology. It is absolutely a vetted consideration in the RENA process, as well as the housing element process, which will follow. And then lastly, we did get a comment as it pertains to accounting for housing units and housing needs specifically for Cal Poly Humboldt. So I wanted to highlight a couple of things here. What you'll see in the blue, this is a slightly transformed graph. So before, we were looking at housing units that would be allocated to each agency. If you go by the county's average, which is the county average is 2.2 people per housing unit, that transforms our allocation into a population. So what you'll see for Arcata, if they are allocated 1,042 units, that would equate to housing availability through RENA of about 2,100 new population. What's important to note is that Arcata's RENA doesn't interface with Humboldt State's student-led housing projects. Those don't qualify under RENA because they're not permanent households, and those are projects that are led by the state and the university and not by the city of Arcata. So in looking at the recently completed housing project that Cal Poly Humboldt did along the freeway there, in addition to some future housing projects that are part of their physical campus plan, which they just released, within the next housing element cycle, it's pretty reasonable to think that there's planning efforts in place that could produce housing opportunity for upwards of 6,000 people in Arcata alone, in between the university's housing goals and projects they're looking at moving towards, which aren't RENA projects, in addition to Arcata's projects that would be associated with RENA. If you take one step beyond that, thinking about the county and the town center project and their proximity to Arcata and Cal Poly Humboldt as well, as Supervisor Madrone mentioned, 20-year build out of that site could accommodate 2,600 housing units. A 10-year build out might accommodate 1,000 housing units, which would provide housing for, again, upwards of 2,200 more people. So with that said, the region through RENA, through Cal Poly Humboldt's efforts on student housing, there will be plans in place over the next housing element cycle that realistically could result in housing opportunities for upwards of 10, 12,000 people within the area of Cal Poly Humboldt, which is more than double of the doubling they're looking at doing right now. So while not being directly measured in the allocation method between what's happening on the RENA side, between what's happening on the Cal Poly side, there's certainly the gears are turning, the thoughts are happening on how to provide the housing opportunity for the intended growth, specifically based on Cal Poly. So with that, I will happily cede the floor and hand it back to the board, but I do want to end on the staff and again emphasize that it's the regional working group's recommendation that the HCOG board identify alternative 1 as the preferred RENA allocation methodology, and to increase the income category adjustment to 20%. Again, that's that second table that assigns the units per income category for each agency. And happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Any new questions pop up in this section?
I have a couple.
Yes.
Who actually is part of the working group, RENA?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, it's basically the community development director or equivalent from each local agency. So some of our local agencies, including Trinidad, are represented by consultants. So in that case, it's the planning consultant for that area. For the county, it's John Ford. For Eureka, it's Miss Kenyon, who's in attendance tonight. But again, every agency sends at least one person, some send multiple, and it's the senior level staff that are in attendance on those meetings.
Okay. So Trinidad does send somebody for those meetings?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Why, it seems a little odd that the return on the survey request seems a little low to me, especially since Eureka is, the biggest player.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did look at past RENA cycles, and actually in cycle 6, I believe it was just 1 or 2 agencies formally responded. I think largely that comes down to the fact that when we work together regionally, and I'll say I think we've had 3 or 4 meetings in the last few months where the entire group's getting together for a couple hours at a time and working through these areas in detail. So I think in going through a lot of those exercises, we're covering a lot of that same ground. It doesn't always translate into receiving, those survey responses per se, but
that's kind of what I figured the answer was going to be.
Yeah.
So let's see. I'm a little curious where the data comes from on the overcrowding issue, because it looked like, based on Arcata's response, that they said like only 2% or 2.7% of the respondents indicated there's like more, or 1.5 persons per room or whatever. So it's like Eureka really demonstrating a lot of overcrowding, or?
Yeah, I can't speak to it agency by agency. We did receive, in Arcata's response, they looked up the data specific to their jurisdiction and noted that. The overcrowding that we receive is part of our regional housing needs determination from HCD. What they don't look at it agency by agency. They look at the aggregated number for the county that they get through American Community Survey data, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was also puzzling that they First, they added 349 for overcrowding, and then they subtracted 349 later on in the chart.
Yeah, and the reason they do that, and I believe they covered that in their presentation last time. What that is a correction to say we're looking at cost burdened housing and we're looking at overcrowded housing, and sometimes there's overlap. So I think the subtraction there is to say, hey, 349 units are also otherwise expected to exhibit both symptoms, cost burdened and overcrowding. And I think it's just ironic. Well, it's not ironic. The reason it's the exact same number is they can't subtract more than that number from the allocation. So what they do is they basically add it and then subtract it again. So
it's like a wash.
Yeah, exactly. It's an issue that exists, but wherever it exists, it's also associated with cost burden.
Yeah. You know, I wasn't quite sure I was understanding the slide about cost burden. Is that essentially cost burden? You're saying the houses are just too expensive there, and that's
yeah. The houses and the rents for that matter.
Okay.
So the key target for cost burden in it, the magic number is 30%, right? If you go to a bank or anywhere, what they want in a loan is not necessarily to loan somebody, you know, a mortgage that's going to cost beyond 30% of their gross household income. Of course, that doesn't exist anymore per se, but that's the number that is always tried to be targeted. The national average right now for housing is that people are spending about 31% of their gross annual income on housing. Humboldt County's average is 42% if you look across the entirety of the jurisdiction. If you look at jurisdiction by jurisdiction, it fluctuates kind of between, I think it was about 38% and then 44% for most agencies. Arcata is uniquely high at 50%, but that's largely because of the student population, because that gets counted as part of the census data, you know, so.
okay.
Yeah, so there's just a little bit of skew there because it's students and residents that get included in that.
So the chart, when you had the chart up, or the slide up there, it showed Eureka at 50%.
That would have been Arcata.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, at least unless I labeled the jurisdictions wrong, but.
And so that means that people are spending half their income for housing.
Well, that means 50%. That 50% of people are spending more than 30% on housing.
I see. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. That's what the chart means, is the percentage of households that are over that magic 30% number.
Okay. Well, I also think it's significant that, you know, when you look at the government code under factor 10, well, no, actually, it's earlier on, where 584.04E really only requires the COG, it says it shall consider including the following factors. So you have to consider including these factors, but you don't actually have to apply them if you.
That's correct. What it really wants you to do is to be thinking about all those things when you're making your allocation decisions, but it doesn't necessarily need to result in doing some sort of a direct, you know, allocation math because of that factor.
Right.
Again, like water and sewer, or like, you know, housing needs for farm workers is one, and
Right.
again,
So you could like weight it as a value of 1 or 0 even. Right?
Yeah. You could make methods, as somebody who's done a lot of kind of mathy things in my life, you can make things very complicated, or you can try and distill things down into maybe a more simplistic or robust systems. Sometimes the more you fold into something also means that you're using data that could be less robust, or it introduces more other potential errors or inconsistencies or stuff like that. So part of what we're trying to do is balance our objectives, but also not necessarily overcomplicate our approach, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And there was a question I emailed in earlier. I don't know if that got to you.
I did, yeah.
You saw that. I wanted to see if you can amplify a little bit on that question. which has to do with, subsequent revisions of housing element. So they talk about the 7th and subsequent. Is everybody on the 7th revision now because this is cycle 7?
That's what we're going into.
Okay.
So agencies currently have certified 6 cycle housing elements. That area of the code basically says that at the 7th cycle, homeless as a factor shall be considered in the allocation. And what you see in that is that in our regional housing needs determination, we were given units due to the point in time counts for homelessness.
Okay, so this is the 7th, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So it's going in. This is the 7th cycle of RENA, which will be accompanied by the 7th cycle of housing elements. So it is a requirement this time around, regardless of the other section of code in there.
Yeah.
And that's why it's included in the determination we received from HCD.
Right, okay. Well, I tend to agree with your response to the commenters about the use of the population and jobs analysis, because I think it encompasses a lot more than maybe they were observing, or so I guess I think I'm pretty much in favor of the option that staff has recommended here. So thanks so much for those answers. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, any other?
Just as a point of order, since there was more of the presentation, is there opportunity for public comment?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I was just going to get
to the questions. I wasn't sure. Thank you. That's all.
If there's no more questions, I'll open up for public comment. Okay. Any public comment?
Kristen Kenyon again. I just want to thank Brendan. That was a great presentation.
Okay. Well, we have a decision to make here.
Brendan, just out of curiosity, does the graphs that you the charts you currently show us do include the 20% category income adjustment? Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
And I'll go one step further. It's the same one that is noted in the staff report, and I also noted in there that if for some reason alternative 2 was something that the board would want to entertain, that table would look a little bit differently. Not notably differently, because as we saw, it doesn't change a whole lot with a 10% weighting difference. But yes, what's in the staff report and on there was the 20% and the 50-50 weighting scenario.
I would make a motion to approve alternative 1 and the 20% allocation as recommended by staff.
I would second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. So all in favor?
Actually, can I make one more comment? Sorry. Just one more.
Just one more?
Just one more. No, I want to just say that I really appreciated the conversation and the presentation. And I also just want to say out loud that these numbers are absolutely outrageous. And what I would like to see in the future is the state puts these numbers out. I'd like to see them perhaps lead by example. There are a lot of empty properties in our region. We've talked about this at our council. There's a lot of empty properties, and perhaps they could step up and show us how it's done, perhaps. That wouldn't be a bad thing.
Lead by example.
Lead by example. Model the behavior you want to see. Thank you.
Spoken by a true teacher. Okay. With that, we do have a motion and a second before us. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Okay. We have our task before us. And I would like to say thank you to all of the city staff and agencies that participated in this and brought their expertise to bear and laid out a map, so to speak. Now we'll navigate it. So With that, we're at HCOG and PAC member reports, beginning with our executive director's report.
I will be brief, but I do have just a few quick updates I wanted to provide the board. And all of them pertain to the RTP. So Stevie will be bringing up here, this is the final flyer. So at our last board meeting, we talked about some of the community outreach we were starting to shape for our RTP update. So we have finalized this flyer. It's up on our website and we'll be getting this out, but it does show the QR codes again to the surveys, the transportation plan related surveys that we have both in English and Spanish. And it also shows the events that we're looking at either attending or hosting as it pertains to the RTP itself. Will be at the Tri-County Independent Living Expo Friday, September 26th. I believe we'll be at the North Country Fair this weekend. We'll be at the Arcata Friday Night Market, September 26th as well. So that'll be a double day with the Tri-County Independent Living Expo. We will also plan on being at the Fortuna Apple Harvest Festival with a table. Thank you, Chair Johnson, for helping facilitate that. And then lastly, we are planning on having our in-person meeting for the RTP in McKinleyville this time around at Azalea Hall. We thought that prudent, just given how much just housing and related activity has been the topic of discussion in that community that seems very engaged in the area of transportation right now. So we wanted to do it in a slightly different location this time around. The only other report outside of that I did want to make the board aware of. So our previous schedule for the RTP update presented the board considering adoption at our January meeting. I wanted to let the board know I have or intend to right after we wrap some of this up, send a letter off to Caltrans requesting a 1-month extension for our due date. Reason being is we would like to make sure that we can respond to comments received. Our public comment period closes right before Christmas. And while we could, of course, respond quickly and take it directly to the board, we all very much want to be able to be thoughtful about that and also take it through our SS TAC and our TAC before coming to the board. And without that 1-month extension, we could still complete everything. We would just have to either hold kind of last minute special meetings of those two committees or skip one or both of them. And none of them want to see that, and neither do we. So we have submitted that request. All indications are we will get that just fine. And we would be bringing the RTP for final adoption to the board in February now, and we would be able to bring it to our committees at the beginning of February as well. So with that, that is all I have to report.
Thank you. And we do not have a Caltrans report or a HTA report, but do we have any board member reports?
Excuse me, this is Jeff Pimentel
Oh.
from Caltrans. I can give an update if you guys would like one.
That would be awesome.
All right. So I'll make it brief. So in terms of the Indianola Undercrossing project, we are on track to get traffic up and over the bridge this construction season. We expect that to happen by November. We recently poured the concrete sidewalk under the bridge, and as well as completed pouring the concrete approach slabs on each end of the bridge this week as well. We'll begin and continue working on placing the aggregate base on the embankment and plan for paving here soon before November so that we can get traffic moving up and over the bridge. We do still plan, as I mentioned last time, to have Indianola remain closed in both directions until next construction season once we can build the southbound on and off ramps. Once those are constructed, and we can pave under the bridge, and we would expect to open that up. And along with that, next season, we would close the median crossings at the various intersections that are now open. And then we also plan to install the half signal at Airport Road next season as well.
Well,
That is all.
Thank you. And thank you for your diligence in reporting that. We had a different window set up for our online comments, and you were invisible.
Got it.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. Well, thanks for having me, and we'll see you guys next month.
All right. So now we will move to PAC and board member reports. We have no PAC members now. Anybody have anything to report? Okay. Well, with that, we will adjourn. And thank you, everyone, for your participation today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.